I think we could probably talk all day, but we only have 24 minutes. So I only have 4 questions, but I would love all of you to chime in and ask each other questions, if you're so inclined. Lyla, you mentioned sort of misnomers and misunderstandings about, you know, the way your people, like what we call your group, your tribe. What did you call? Sorry.
Nation.
Your nation. Sorry. Holy cow. See, there's the misunderstanding right there.
All good.
I'd love to hear from each of you what people may misunderstand about the concepts you talked about today. Like, where have the misunderstandings come, and how do you sort of overcome those? And anybody can start if you're ready.
What? Good, please. No. I wish I could walk into a room and have nobody have a preconception about green chemistry. But the word green and the word chemistry already has a misperception. And I think the thing that people don't understand is that green chemistry, the point of green chemistry isn't a way to measure or characterize the state of things. It is a mechanistic tool of how to invent those things. So it's not an alternative to a way of assessing. It's if you're in the lab pouring beakers and flasks, creating a new material, or working with biomaterials to craft a new fundamental building block, how do you anticipate those negative potential impacts ahead of time? And that's what I think most people, think it's an evaluative tool. And it's not. It's a R&D tool to help inventors invent. And the other thing is they say, oh, green chemistry is going to not work as well, and it's going to be too expensive. The definition of green chemistry is a technology that has superior performance, appropriate cost, and oh, by the way, is also sustainable and circular. And so and that people don't really realize that. That's the misperception I'm facing all the time.
It's interesting.
Yeah.
Who else wants to jump in?
Yeah, I was thinking that one of the misconceptions often is that when I talk about indigenous regenerative ecosystem design and stuff, people think it's a Native American thing, when in fact it's a human thing. Each and every one of us here, we have roots, indigenous roots to a place, or maybe places if you're multiracial like me. But each of us has a connection to ancestors who were extremely advanced and who have technologies that, not just physical technologies, but conceptual technologies that can guide each and every one of us in our daily work. And I think the least indigenous people that people expect to be indigenous is like Europeans, but if you even look at Europe, I went into the caves in France and found 17,000-year-old cave paintings, and they were painting the bison and the ibex and pregnant women, and they were honoring Mother Earth and different beings. And my little friend was with me, and he was like, if these people are so primitive, how come they can paint better than us? And I was like, fair question. I mean, they was gorgeous. I mean, there was like 3-dimensional paintings going on and the firelight flickering on the bison. I mean, it was amazing. So that's the other misconception, is that anything in the past was automatically more primitive, which is just not true. I don't know if we've ever been as primitive as we are today, as uncivilized as we are today. But there are so many extraordinary technologies embedded in each and every one of our DNA, and it's not a Native American thing, it's a human thing.
I love that. It reminds me of when we first spoke and you mentioned how it's everything we do is a symbol of our values, right? And we all have values embedded somewhere in there that we just need to find. Asha, Bill?
I think when it comes to biomimicry, one of the most common confusion that can happen is more on the technical side as to what biomimicry really is. So oftentimes it can be confused with bio-assisted, bio-utilization, there's biomorphism, there's also synthetic biology, there's biodesign, so there's a lot of bios out there. And it can happen very often that there is some confusion around it. One thing that I always try to remember and remind is that biomimicry is a lot about functioning like nature. So it's about how would nature do it. So it's the verb, and it's about understanding like what we can learn from it, what are those strategies and mechanisms that nature is using, organisms, processes, ecosystems, how might those challenges be solved? And it's not to say one is better than the other, or they all have their own roles and they all have their own merits. Biomimicry is something that really supports us in being able to dig deeper into the function part, and hence can be applied to so many different fields. It can be applied to materials, architecture, fashion, textiles, like name anything, and organizational design, social infrastructure. But once we try to understand like how something functions, it's easier to build that bridge, that functional bridge, from human design to biological design and then back.
Love that. And there's biochemistry, which kept me out of med school.
There we go.
Phil?
I think a critical thing for me, I've said often, is being less bad is not being good. It's being bad by definition, just less so. So this whole movement to net zero, more strange language for the children. We give them double negatives and expect them to understand what we're talking about. Being less bad. How many people send out their kids in the morning and go, you know, it'd be a good idea to be less bad today? It doesn't make sense. We have this strange thing that goes on. So I think that's one of the biggest ones, is we have net zero by 2050. How many of the companies are making it, are on track for this? I was asked to look at this, and I did, and it's not a good bit of news. These are the kinds of goals, the ambitions that are easy to say and very hard to do, and really do need determination and care and a design philosophy. And I think what we've heard today, too, the thing that holds us all together is we're all coming from values, not value. So we're here to talk about circular economy, which sounds like numbers and science and things like that, but it isn't. It's about first values. What do we believe in? What is right? What is wrong? Before we start saying what is less, what is more. Right and wrong are more important than less and more, because if you're doing the wrong thing perfectly with Six Sigma, you can become perfectly wrong, you know? So this idea that we could be more good is really critical. And if we look at the relationship, say, between Plato and Aristotle, his student, Plato was interested in the human values, ethics, morals, and so on. And then he goes to principles, and then to visions, and then to goals, and then strategies, and tactics, and then metrics. And this is Aristotle. Aristotle was looking for truth in number, in its science. Plato's looking for truth in meaning. And do you realize that if you start with value, numbers, you can't get to values. You get up to strategies and goals maybe, but you don't find yourself at the fundamental principles and the right and the wrong. You're still lost in the numbers. So my concern is that we don't get stuck in the numbers. That we start to imagine what it means for us all to love all the children of all species for all time, and really do think about what is the good, not just how to be less bad.
Love that. So John, you talked about waking up in the morning and you can find data points to support anything good or bad, right? We can always find data points. I think we've learned that from a lot of people in public life these days. But I wonder if each of you has an example of a data point that shows that what you're doing, what you've devoted your careers to, is having a positive impact. And anyone can go first. I didn't tell them anything about what I was going to ask them. That's why there's this fun pause after we ask a question.
That's a hard question. I think that, well, frankly, a lot of what I do is to help Native children have pride in who they are, because we're taught, that we're primitive and we're stupid and we're backward, and Europe is the pinnacle of civilization, and I know that couldn't be further from the truth, that we're all equal, actually, and that we all have gifts and contributions to make. But I didn't know how advanced my ancestors were until I started digging into it. And I was like, wow, we don't just kind of have a cute thing to be proud of. Like, we have a lot to be proud of. So I think when Native youth come up to me and say, you know, that my research changed them and helped them see more of their ancestors than they knew before, frankly, that's been one of my big metrics of success.
Amazing.
Yeah.
I think the community, the green chemistry community, has grown so much, and just the large growth of the community. And I can't claim this. Dr. Amy Cannon, the executive director of Beyond Benign, leads what's called that green chemistry commitment. And I think that data point, that 240 universities globally have signed a commitment saying that they will change the curriculum. If you think circular economy is difficult, try to change a university's curriculum. And Amy has managed to do that. And that's, interestingly enough, it's not the president of the university, it's not the dean of the university, it's not the chair of the chemistry, it's the students. The students are going and saying, why aren't we being taught this? And that's just so cool to watch.
It's amazing.
Yeah.
Asha?
I'll try to answer it perhaps tangentially. So one thing that I think about is that we're facing these very systemic challenges. These are systems-level challenges which don't really have a silver bullet solution. So in some ways, what we need are those ecosystems of solutions. And in some ways, like what biomimicry does is it provides this exponential vision of what could be, but it exists. It exists already right now in everything that we see in nature. It already exists. And so I'm an architect by training, and whenever we have one of those challenges, like how to create something that's resource efficient, there's always a place that I can go. There's always this question that I can ask, and I will find at least one, if not a few hundred examples of how that can be done. So just knowing that that exists is a very big deal, because it's not this thinking that, oh, we don't have those solutions. Yes, we have those solutions. We need to figure out how to translate it into our design and how it works. So in terms of data points, I think the interesting thing is like looking at this vast ecosystem of solutions. So globally, industries, across industries, people are coming up with these solutions. They might be at startup stage, they might be already out there and commercialized. And they can be something as simple as a chair, but then there are also like buildings and urban design planning that has happened. And these things already exist. So there are so many examples that we can start looking at. At the Biomimicry Institute, we have the Ray of Hope Accelerator, where we have so many startup examples of folks who are trying to change the world. But then also we have Project Positive from Biomimicry 3.8, where they're looking at larger ecosystems. So those data points exist, but I think, again, coming back to this idea of values, I think it's understanding how do we put those solutions together that can create a different world, that can create a different system for us to operate within.
Love that. And Bill, you shared a couple success stories in your talk, but interested, as you look back on your career, what are the data points of success?
Well, just thinking about the notion of the education, I was a dean at a university, School of Architecture, and there we had to find ways to teach design to landscape architects, historians, architects, and so on. And when I came there at the beginning, the faculty said, "You're an interdisciplinarian. You know, when you start designing a building, you ask questions like, what birds are flying overhead? You know, things like that. What benthic invertebrates are in this water? And are you telling us that our students ought to become zoologists? They don't even know how to do a drawing." And I said, "No, I'm not asking them to be interdisciplinarians." They said, "Yeah, but you got tenured, and you never got peer reviewed. You can't even be peer reviewed." I said, well, I'm not asking people to become zoologists. I just want them to know they need one. We want to become multidisciplinarians. We want to share with each other. We want to learn from each other. It's really critical. Then later, when I was on a faculty, like at Cornell or other places where I've visited, or Cambridge, there I'm working with the teaching and the students, and we're getting into these amazing opportunities to think through things freshly, like we've heard. And that's been a thrill. And then most recently, I'm a distinguished research professor at a science university, and that's how I could research the chemistry and the physics of concrete, which is, something very dear to the heart of builders. So it's really interesting that we can wander around and spend time with each other and celebrate this. And that to me is the success, is that we're having more fun than everybody else. I think that's the biggest part of our movement. I was just in Washington, D.C. I got to go to the White House. Imagine. And as we look at what's going on, and the whole notion that regulatory environments are in turmoil, the protocols for how we go forward. I went and spent a few days studying the data centers around Washington, D.C. It's the most highly concentrated data centers in the world. And the amount of power they require for artificial intelligence now. And the power lines that are coming in, 765 kilovolt power lines. These are immense things, and they're all over the place. And here was this beautiful landscape of orchards and forests and farming. And now it's like Avatar, it's some grinding the way over it. And it was really amazing to look at and realize we don't have to do it like this, We don't. There are other ways for us to think, other ways to act. And what worries me is that the whole notion of artificial intelligence is interesting, but it's going to know everything, okay. But you know what? It doesn't know anybody.
It's deep.
This is people. And I think that I'm much more interested in watching natural wisdom come in on an equal footing to artificial intelligence. Because just because we have smart things doesn't mean it's wise. I think wisdom has to overtake intelligence now.
Love that. Asha, you mentioned that the end of one life is the start of another, which I thought was a really poignant way to put it. And then, Bill, you said, you used the term producing perpetual products. I'm curious about this. Let's inject some hope or doom, depending on how you all answer this question. Is that possible in our human-made world, to have a perpetual product, to have the end of one life be the start of another? Have you seen it? Do you think it's possible?
Now or ever?
Let's look at both horizons.
Well, it exists. Right? When you look at just even the notion of the forest and its ability to cycle, it is perpetual. That is the notion. And one thing's wasted, another thing's food. And if we're going to talk about any kind of spiral economy, is always a deflationary spiral, and it's all about, we're losing everything. It's misery. In this, what we're talking about in this room, is the idea of a spiral that's going up. Because if we're reusing things, you can grow the economy, and we're not having to go back to the earth and say, give me more. We're saying we're going to use these things again, and we're going to make more fecundity out of our own wisdom, rather than just go get some more stuff. So this idea of constantly decoupling, resource use from the economy because we're circular, we're not decoupling anything, we're recoupling it, obviously. Why are we always doing everything? We're people, So I think that's really the reason it's possible, is that Leibniz, spent 300 pages describing how if that things are possible for designers, if they're possible, they exist. Because we're architects. It exists in our head. It already exists. Our job is to manifest it and show it and execute it. So our job is to make it exist. Therefore, it is possible. So do what Shaw did. Get to work. We're storing all our raw materials on our customers' floors. Perpetual carpet.
Yeah. Lyla, you look like you're ready to.
Well, I would just add to that that not only is it possible, but it's one of the myths that my elders asked me to try to debunk was this idea that in order to be sustainable and regenerative, we have to be less comfortable, or we have to have less convenience. But not to say all Native American societies were perfect, because we weren't, but there were quite a few who had managed to reach this, they were humming along really well, and they found this equilibrium. We know that the Chumash in present-day Malibu and Santa Barbara, California, harvested abalone out of the Channel Islands for 11,000 years straight, with no end. In the archaeological record, there is no end to the, when they would eat the abalone and then deposit the shell. There's no interruption. So it's, and the Chumash, by all accounts, were extraordinarily wealthy in every sense. And that's why I put wealth in my title slide of my presentation, because it's like, this is true wealth. This is the true wealth of nations. It's not competition and individualism like Adam Smith said, but it's mutualism and collaboration that creates the wealth of nations. So, and then I also, so yeah, just this notion that like, we don't have to be less comfortable. We can be extraordinarily comfortable. I would say more comfortable, and less carcinogens around us, and more healthy, our food systems, everything, when we are really humming along in that circular economy, as we're calling it. And then one real quick thing I wanted to add, to take a different spin on the question, is that a lot of death is where life is born. So, for example, collapse. Like I said, not all Native American societies were perfect. We had multiple societies, multiple civilizations, and we're all very densely populated, by the way. That's another misconception, that we're just a few scattered bands of Indians running around. We had huge cities, eco-cities, and these cities sometimes went off the righteous path, and we had slavery way before Columbus was ever born. We had caste systems, we had high priests and low priests and people who would carry all the logs. And anyways, the collapse of those societies created the rebirth of extremely wise societies, because we were like, oh, that didn't work. You know, specifically Chaco Canyon in the year 1100 collapsed, a huge train wreck. And that's where my ancestors come from. So after we left that pyramid way of living where some people are better than others, now if you look at our society, we're all equal, all of our clans are equal. So I often say, Native Americans, we weren't just born this cool. You know, we had a lot of trial and error. We effed up a lot to get here. We earned it, so the hard way. Through collapse. And so I'm hopeful that this planetary collapse we're going through might be our crucible of transformation.
That's very hopeful.
Is that time?
Go ahead.
Yeah, I think this concept of birth and rebirth and death, you know, I approach it, I'm a chemist, and so I look at it as assembly and disassembly at the molecular level. You know, when we started today around noontime and people were eating food, think about it. As you're eating the food, you're breaking proteins into amino acids, carbohydrates into sugars, fatty acids come from the lipids. But that's not all. At the very moment that we're breaking the big molecules into small molecules in the same cells, at the same time, we're growing hair, we're growing fingernails, we're growing skin and energy. Nature has evolved to combine the disassembly and the assembly, or the birth or the death at the molecular level at the same time. What do? You go to a factory, you see people manufacturing things, and then get in a car, drive far away, and there's a factory that's recycling things. They're both plugged into energy, using all kinds of energy. That is so unnatural. When you go to a building and you say, I can't tell, are they manufacturing or are they recycling? Then we're sustainable. But until that time, and what is the most important ingredient to get from where we are today to where we're going to need to be? The most important ingredient is humility. That we think we know all the answers, and we don't. It's going to take years. And so it's patient optimism is what we need to get to where we are. If we're impatient, we can't be optimistic because stuff hasn't been invented yet. But we have so much to learn. And if we could just put humility in the forefront and put the ego aside and learn from nature, from indigenous culture, we've got so far to go. But I can't help but be optimistic because we have no choice but to be.
Awesome.
Yeah.
So I see a bunch of red zeros. I see it's after 3 o'clock. So Asha, you get last word. Optimism,
Yes.
hopefully.
I just want to add, humans have a tendency and a love for permanency. We go from growth and try to conserve things as they are. Big part of how nature works is embracing change. And once we can start to learn to embrace that instead of being fearful of change all the time, and really start to embrace that release and reorganization, that can be of incredible value to us, and that can really help us create those changes, those transitions, have the end of one life be the beginning of another.
Awesome. I'm so glad you all chose optimism because I was going to choose doom. I'm glad I didn't get a chance to answer the question. Let's thank our speakers one more time.
Thank you.